days ago, you would have received my welcome email, and now I want to share a little bit about my journey going through spiritual awakening, because I can relate to what you're going through because I've been there myself. And so I thought I would share a bit more than I have in my YouTube video. I have a welcome video there that talks a little bit about my journey, but I really want today to share more of the detail with you since you've joined my email subscription list. And from here on in, you'll be receiving more information from my personal journey, as well as things I've learned, as well as, really helping you along this life's journey based on what I have gone through myself, and then also some of the gifts that have opened up for me and sharing some of that information as well. So I thought it would be nice for you to get to know me a little bit more on a deeper level before we move forward. So this time what I'm going to share is the details of my awakening journey. I'm going to do half of it today and then leave you with some of, I guess I would say, where I realized I was really on the journey. So to start off, I have my entire life spent it living what I consider to be pretty typical. I was never involved in or knew anything really about spirituality as such, intuitive gifts, anything to have to do outside of mainstream religion, I guess I would say. And although I've studied all kinds of religions, been very interested in it before, I was kind of walking through life a bit unconsciously in that sense, but there was a spark of me that had a great desire to learn about other religions than I grew up as a Christian in a pretty liberal Protestant faith, Congregationalism, if you're familiar with it. And then really just kind of went off on my own and started just studying and looking into more esoteric kinds of things. I enjoyed, I guess I enjoyed the whole sci-fi realm. And that's kind of as far as it got. I was never into the, I guess I would say, tarot cards or any of that. In fact, I'll say right now, I just kind of always thought it was something I was supposed to avoid and stayed away from it. Not for any real reason. I just thought I wasn't supposed to. And I worked in very large companies. So I really had a traditional path for the most part. Grew up just kind of being a typical kid, having some real nice opportunities sports-wise, went on to college, got my degree, got married, did that whole thing, and then started working and really had a successful career over multiple decades, where I was continuing to, take on higher and higher responsibilities in the large companies that I worked for in management positions. And, was doing that 9 to 5, and actually, it turned out to be 7 to 7 and then weekends. And that was my life. And I would work in vacations. I would work in my exercise and fun with friends, but it was kind of a cycle I was in. So that continued for the majority of my life until 2015, January, in fact. And I remember distinctly coming out of New Year's and feeling, and I've always been pretty connected to how I feel and myself, even though I was still feeling like I was running around pretty unconscious. I knew something was shifting in me because I had started to meet some new people, and I'm not that social, and I don't go out meeting new people that often, but I had run into someone who, when I met him, something was different. I was set off by this literal spark in his eyes. And I remember thinking, that is so odd. This just doesn't happen to me, or at least I'm not conscious of that happening to me. And this is key, conscious of it happening to me. And I had been, single and not interested in dating, just doing my own thing for a good 5+ years, I think now. or it would have been from 2015. And so anyway, again, when we wake up, so much more is much more clear when things happen to us. Whereas you can look back and go, oh my, was I unconscious during that time? This is when I was really unconscious. I didn't understand what was going on and why I was meeting this individual. Suffice it to say, I really believe this is when my soul started to lead and take over. But I didn't know it, all right? And I think many of you probably are also able to take a look at when you maybe start to become conscious of how your soul was leading, or you'll start to know that during this journey. So anyway, kind of long story short, we ended up deciding to get together for drinks. And that is so not me. I just kind of like to stay home and do my thing. And I was not interested in meeting anyone else, but I felt this great need to meet this person. Now, before we actually got together, because we had these grand plans. Oh yeah, let's get together sometime. We spent a month and a half from January of 2015 to the end of, I think it was February of 2015, just piddling around, doing our work and being too busy to get together. Seriously. So we just emailed each other and we kind of got to know each other through email. And suddenly I wrote and I said, before we write ourselves into a unicorn and rainbow fairy tale about ourselves, we should just get together, because it was kind of getting silly. We were just sharing all this information, volumes of writing to each other. So we did. We talked for 5 hours that night, just the two of us, two total strangers that I had just happened to meet him. Well, so along this came where this evening turned out to be something very different. And as it turned out, it took us another 2 weeks before we got together again. And I had that night, and his name's Kent, I had given him a big hug before we left. And that is so not me either. I just was going to part ways with him, but I felt this intense need to hug this man. And so I did. I gave him a big hug, and I just felt like, ooh, I didn't know what it was. But again, I'm leading up to that whole idea of, I think, our souls create something different for us, create a different experience for us when we are meant to actually be connected to someone. And this is what was happening. So suffice it to say, we waited another, if you can believe this, 2 or 3 weeks before we could get together again, because we were too busy with our work. And you know how that goes. And your human self lets you pass over opportunities so often that your soft-speaking soul is wanting you to take advantage of. So anyway, point is, we got together again. And now this is in March of 2015, and there's a reason for me telling you this, because soon thereafter, everything just clicked with us. And we were almost inseparable. I thought, this is so strange, because I am inviting a gentleman into my house, a man in my house where I just never, I just wasn't that interested. And, usually went out rather than bringing someone into my house. And it just felt like he'd always been here. And so over the course of the next month, from about middle of March of 2015 to end of April of 2015, we were inseparable. We had a ball together, talking endlessly talking, and really forming an incredibly tight relationship as though we had never not been together. And so one night, April 25th of 2015, I offered him a birthday evening, because his birthday was the next day on the 26th. So Kent came over, and we ended up sitting down, having a beautiful dinner, and I shared with him his gift at that time, which was going to be a weekend where we were actually going to go out camping and head over to a beautiful spot over in a neighboring state. I'm in the Midwest, over to Wisconsin. And I was so excited because I'd never done really anything like that with someone that I really didn't know that well. And, just a new adventure for me. It was somebody that just sparked something inside of me, even though I couldn't have probably articulated it at that time. So anyway, needless to say, I was excited. It was a beautiful night. I had given him a cupcake with a candle on it, and it was just a beautiful evening. So it was a Sunday night, so both of us were getting busy to work the next day, and I had a really high-flying job at the time, for the highest level position I've had in my entire career. So I had intense work that I was doing. He as well. So it wasn't unusual for me not to hear from someone, or from him on a particular day, but we'd gotten pretty used to staying in touch. And that next day, on his birthday, that evening, I didn't hear from him. And I remember it was about 10 o'clock, and I remember thinking, well, that's kind of odd. But I went to bed because, we're both busy and stuff comes up, and he had a tendency to work very late in the night because he had his own business. And from that, I ended up going to bed, getting up in the morning after I had texted him and getting ready for work. No big deal, same thing. And I looked at my phone, and there's like a mile long of text saying, I fainted at one of the grocery stores last night. That's why I didn't contact you. I've been in the university hospitals, and they have done 5 brain scans on me. They're trying to figure out what's wrong because I fainted and I hit my head and something isn't right. And as it turns out, he then proceeds to tell me that they found a brain tumor. Well, everything changed there. I ended up calling him. We chatted in length. He explained how he's going to have surgery the following week. And out of my mouth came, you're going to move in with me, because we're both on our own. And he didn't have any children at home, and I don't. And I said, you're going to move in with me, and we're going to do this together, and we're going to get this done, and on we'll go. Well, obviously, all the plans of going on our nice little trip were canceled. This new, great, cool relationship that I would never expected in a million years had shifted dramatically from this magical place to this unbelievable circumstances that were unfolding. So that changed everything. And he ended up having his surgery the following week. This was in May of 2015. So look at that time frame. I mean, it's pretty short that I even knew this person. And so here I am having him move in my house. We brought all his things in, got him ready and prepared. He would recover here at home. And no one knew this. Not our families, nobody knew that we even knew each other. And being a private person, he chose not to talk to his family about it. He had a very small family and chose not to talk about that, the situation, and didn't want to worry anyone. So consequently, I was the only one who ever knew anything about this, the severity of it until the end, because he was diagnosed that next week with glioblastoma brain cancer, which, as if any of you know, it is the most deadly form of brain cancer. And I believe the rate of someone passing from glioblastoma is like at 98% within 14 months. And so it's devastating. And for him to be diagnosed with that, well, we were going to beat it. And he came back to my place after brain surgery, and the next 10 months were a series of, no kidding, weekend after weekend of difficulties, whether it be pharmaceuticals that you can't get enough of, appointments that went awry, steroid use for the brain tumor, all kinds of reactions to that, appointments, a second surgery, radiation, chemo. Need I explain the detail? But anybody who's been there, and I hope you never are, if you have been, bless you. It's one of the most difficult things someone can go through, I believe. So I journeyed with him through 10 months of trial after trial after trial. And of course, our life was never the same, because and then he also got shingles too. There you go. And had to put off his radiation and chemo, which then allowed the tumor to grow back, which he then had to have a second surgery. And then from there, it was too late because the tumor had grown back, the radiation and chemo could not help. And now here we are at the end of 2015, and I'm starting to see all kinds of changes, what I would call dementia kinds of changes. And then the next thing I know, we are in a situation where, I'm caring for somebody, and still our families don't know the extent of this to a great degree. And it's just the two of us dealing with this. And, my family had never met him either. My mother was lucky enough to meet him for the first time. And just once briefly when he felt good enough, that was it. And I had never met his family. So here we were, I was caring for him in this very odd situation that I would never have expected in my entire life. And in December of 2015, that's when the changes happened. And we called in hospice. The situation was such that this January of 2016 was my dark night of the soul, because at that time when he entered hospice, we thought he was coming back home, which he was not. And, well, he was, but not for a very long time. And we'd only gone in for pain prescription medication increase. And yet they now, hospice now was, kind of taking over. So things were dramatically changing, and my dark night of the soul occurred at that time when I completely broke down with the hospice nurse, realizing now that he was dying. And this is when I think I was cracked wide open. I remember it very specifically. And now I was dealing with something completely different. So he came home, and within a couple of weeks, he had chosen to have help from his home. And I now know that it was because he didn't want to burden me with his passing in my home and have that memory of him. And so he passed away without me by his side, with his brother who had come into town to help out, and with hospice, and wanted to be on his own. And it had just really gotten to a point where it was just a matter of time. And so I never saw him again after that time that he left my house, thinking that I would give him some time to adjust to his home again. I would go back over and visit. That never happened. And he passed away as he wanted to on his own in his house. Actually, they ended up taking him to hospice. And from there, I was notified. And that's when everything shifted for me. Going from someone who honestly was just living life, a really nice life, great life, but so much of it was on this unconscious level. And yet I'm also very aware, I think, of certain understandings, but I was cracked wide open in January of 2016. And that is when I had my dark night of the soul, thinking that's when my spiritual awakening journey had actually begun. But what I did learn was later on, and this is a knowing that I've had just fairly recently, is it actually began in 2010, but in a very subtle way. Well, actually, in a very fast way. But then I had a series of almost 5 or 6 years where I was able to just be on my own, and I was just exploring the understanding of the world, the politics, and just, things started opening up to me, and I was starting to see how things weren't really as they were. I also, during that time, went vegetarian. I mean, a lot of things changed that I would never have expected, but this is all kind of part of that journey. So when I look back, I realized I started in 2010 with a significant event when I was traveling overseas with a friend and my mom. And essentially, I remember that breakfast that morning where I knew that I felt freedom in my soul, because I wasn't probably going to see this friend of mine anymore, because he had kind of moved on, but we'd been traveling together. And all of a sudden I felt released. I felt like I had freedom, and it kind of was, which is so strange to say. But then over that period of 5 years, I segued into this awakening, which I never would have understood until I went through this dark night of the soul, because typically your dark night of the soul is not the start of your awakening, which I thought was mine, and that certainly wasn't the case after I had enough opportunity to have time pass and look back. So when Kent passed away, as you might imagine, it was devastating. And during that 10 months, I was just working to get him well. I was doing everything I could and holding down this massively high-level job that was intense stress. And I still don't know how I did it and how I made it through. But after he passed away, literally within a week, something had shifted in me. And I got my first sign from him. And this is the part of the journey where everything changes. And my life went from one of devastation and trying to figure out why this even happened. How could this happen that I meet this beautiful person and 10 months later, he's dead? And why did this happen in my life? Well, I was about to find out. So next week, you will receive another video, and I'm going to share with you the rest of this journey and what happens after the dark night of the soul. In my case, and I think many of you will be able to relate to this, and because I can certainly relate to your stories, given what I have been through on this warp speed awakening process I have been through over the last 2.5 years, and if you want to, the start of the awakening, about 7. So I hope you join me in the next email, because you will be receiving the other half of this, and then we'll move on from there. So thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to getting to know you.